Hello, everyone. I am here with the amazing Professor Amitai Etzioni. Professor, thank you so much for joining me in this amazing edition of Two Conversations podcast. I wanted to begin with just getting to know you and your trajectory up until today. I know you're an expert in sociology, socioeconomics, and communitarianism, and I'm very excited to be talking with you. But talk to me, what ignited your interest in getting to know the depths of our community and to improve it?
Well, I grew up in a small communal village in which the farmers were cooperating. While they each had their own unique plot, they would purchase their seeds together and the fertilizers, and they would sell their products together. And so there was a lot of coordination and cooperation. And all my early days, all I heard of a dinner table was, what else can we do to cooperate? Are we cooperating too much? There's incessant debate about how much community, not that there should be community, but how much.
Talk to me about how can we, as Americans in America, not extrapolate what a kibbutz is, but the values in and of itself of what that community can become in America. Is that possible here?
Well, we don't need to go to fancy extreme experiments in other countries to understand that, for instance, when we talk about how the United States was settled, and we talked about rugged individualism, and people were going west, and we have that image of them jumping each on a horse and going out there and getting a piece of land. Actually, there were caravans. What are caravans? There were a group of people who then settled communities. And then what they built is one house for school for the community. And then there was barn raising, in which people got together to help each other raise their barns. So all this image of rugged individualism is simply a sociological fantasy. The country was settled, so communities. Now, moving forward, as immigrations came from Ireland, from Poland, from Germany, and so on, who the first place they went was to other members of their ethnic community. And so, to a very large degree, ethnic communities help their brothers and sisters settle. Now, in some ideal world, there would be no ethnic line, no racial lines, and everybody would be brothers and sisters. I'm all in favor of that. But for now, the sociological fact is that people help a lot to people of their own kind. I wish they would be completely borderless and boundaryless. But communities are simply a vital part of our sociological existence.
Yes, and one of the big communities that we live nowadays is nation states, right? This amazing piece of geographic territory where whole backgrounds of every single place in the world come together. And it seems that here in the United States, our communities are feeling divided or being fueled with division. And I'm concerned with the future of this. But first, before getting into the future, I would love to hear your insights into why are we in this space in time where we feel divided, even though we're one nation? What's happening here?
Well, you're absolutely right. This is the issue of the day. We lost a sense of community. And they find a very odd situation where nationalism toward other countries is actually strong. The hatred of China is rising, but it doesn't build domestic unity. Historically, the idea was if you have an external enemy, that's going to unite people. And for the first time, I'm aware of any sociological history, this is not happening. We have increasing hatred of the other, but not increased domestic unity. So it started with Patriotism and Reaganism and this rise of libertarian ideas that all that matters is my rights, my liberty, and a very, very odd definition of liberty which no libertarian philosopher would accept. Because every libertarian philosopher, everyone, would agree that liberty doesn't mean you can harm the other. Liberty is not indulgence. Liberty is not license. And so my liberty stops when my fist reaches your nose. So when came a pandemic and we asked people to put on masks in order not to harm the other, this idea came up that impinges on your liberty. And there is no philosophical, moral, or any foundations. So I don't know where it came from, some kind of a form of barbarism. So it's a kind of moral anarchy, but it's very, very strong. And we seem to be able not to be able to find any way to get a handle on it. And it's an odd thing. It's not a question of a philosophical argument. I think it's not to exaggerate. There must be several 100,000 Americans who died unnecessarily. And not only because of one crazy president, but because of an ideology which has no foundation. So the communitarianism is an answer to this crazy libertarianism.
Yes. And one saying that I often think about when I think of freedom is that it's a paradox. For us to have freedom, we have to have ultimate responsibility for one another. And your work in you have cited The Active Society as one of your greatest works. And I got into The New Golden Rule, one of your other works, which is amazing. And The New Golden Rule is basically trying to establish, well, at least for me, how can I, as a young person, think about the moral obligations I have for others, but not only for them, for future generations. So tell me, what's the new golden rule and how can we establish it and start to put it into practice in today's world?
So you see, there are kind of two issues here. One is the question of people keep claiming rights and don't realize that rights require also responsibilities. And the way I started all that, that started my kind of the very, very beginning, when we saw that study that young Americans said that if they are charged with a crime, they have a right to demand that they be tried by a jury and not by a judge. But when they were asked to serve on a jury, they said, find somebody else. So the notion that you have a right to demand a jury, but you will not serve in a jury, then how are you going to get juries? The absurdity of the notion that you can all the time give me, and not give back. And of course, the same how with taxes. Americans, the majority of Americans want more housing, more healthcare, more education, more security, but don't want to pay more taxes. So again, the absurdity, who is his Uncle Sam, who has an endless pocket? So it's so elementary that if you want to have rights, you also have to have responsibilities. So first of all, simply elementary logic. You can't build a house without bricks. The second point is that we're not talking about only a legal language, we're also talking here a moral language. So, I mean, if you look at what parents do for their children, there is no law in the world which prescribes it. And it's love and caring and what friends do for each other. what ethical, what communities do. So much of what we do is really not prescribed by law. It's prescribed by what these human beings do. So what recently happened is to capitalism. So let me digress here for a moment. I think capitalism should be considered like a nuclear power. If it's very well contained in a very strong container, it can do actually quite wonderful things. If it breaks out of these moral and legal boundaries, it can create enormous pain and suffering and havoc. So what happens is capitalism has to contain itself. It cannot allow greed to overcome all considerations, because then it loses its legitimacy. And that's what's happening recently. Capitalism is just running amok, like increasing the price of drugs and so on. I mean, actually, there's a lot of legalized corruption. So we need to not introduce not only the language of responsibilities legally and logically, but also basically say we are members of each other, we live together, and so greed cannot trump all other considerations.
Yes, and I think you're referring to one of your most recent essays, Re-encapsulating Capitalism, which was a very amazing read too. And that was my next question, actually, is to, we live in a capitalist society, in United States embodies capitalism, and maybe from your point of view, it has come to an extreme in what we said, greed has triumphed more than virtuosity and trying to maximize the output for everyone rather than for the few. So in a practical sense, Professor, what's the best way we can pivot our current economic system, such as capitalism, towards a more sustainable and virtuous path?
So I appreciate that question. It's one of my favorite questions. So when people ask me how to make social change, and I always said it's a surprisingly easy question, because there's only one answer. A major social movement, historically, if you think about it, if it is feminism, the civil rights movement, the environmental movement, Zionism, whatever you want to look at it, nationalism, they all have the same. And part of my book, Reclaiming Patriotism, is examining this in some detail. You can get marginal reforms. If you want a major social change, the only way is social movement. And social movement does two things. First, it removes legitimacy from the old structure. But second, it commits to a new shared understanding. See, what happens, what they call people like disruptions. Disruption are fine. You bring down a building, but now you don't build a new building. You have a pile of bricks left. So the importance is not simply to delegitimize and criticize the current status, which is easy, but the question is coming together around a new understanding and then fighting for it. What's the problem is, for a moment, for instance, among the Democrats cannot agree with each other. What is the new vision of the future? And so without that, we cannot have the kind of major social transforming force we need now. So hopefully, out of the severe challenge we face, we'll find some voices which create this new communitarian platform. But honestly, I don't see them at the moment.
You don't see them within our political sphere or within society as a whole?
I don't see them either. I must tell you, I just turned 93, and I've been in World War II, and I've been through the McCarthy era. But this is a dark moment. It's really a dark moment. The challenge to democracy and to sanity. It's just, I mean, it is horrible to see people dying unnecessarily.
Yes, and why is this? Why is this, in your perspective, a dark moment?
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to repeat, because we lost our commitment to the common good, and without the public health is the common good. So if we cannot get people to wear masks voluntarily, and I mean, talk about forcing them. Just think about it. Because we've been debating it so often, we forget how elementary it is. We're asking people to put a little piece of cloth on their face, which many people in other cultures wear anyhow. Considered another piece of attire instead of a tie, so and so on, because it's going to, let's just say, just will protect you from the flu, and we protect other people from the flu, and we cannot get people to, of course, I'm going to do it. And so it's so elementary. If you cannot do that, we don't have the language, we don't have the tools for an elementary moral conversation and civility. So it's a very low point of civility. If you can get people, I mean, talk about the environment and the climate, that is a very difficult goal. Even if you do what I'm asking you, what can I promise you? It will not be as bad as it could be. The environment, the climate, people don't say that if you do all the right things, everything going to be fine. They're going to say, no, it's going to be as bad as it could be. And it requires all the nations to collaborate. I mean, we'll have to make sacrifice, but we have to be sure that Indians and Chinese, it's a very complicated moral story.
Yeah.
But compared to this one, the face mask and the vaccination, I think I could explain it to a 6-year-old. And we have 40 million Americans willing to resort to violence. It just shows you some communitarian bankruptcy.
Yeah.
That the only thing you can say, some people say it's darkest before the sun rises. So, but I have to see the light on the horizon.
Yes, and I agree with you that, putting it into perspective of the new golden rule, the fact of putting the mask in and of itself, even though, for example, some may already have the virus, some may already have the vaccines, so some maybe don't believe in the mask, but putting it into perspective, showing someone that you're wearing the mask during a pandemic, even though we don't know the evidence as a fact, but it's also like a sign to others that we're a community, and I'm here with you. I'm doing this sacrifice, which, for as you argue, it's a small one. To put it in context, is wearing a mask. But some other people are concerned that putting the mask may lead into another abolition of freedom. So that's why some people don't wear it. But I agree with you that just putting it in and of itself is a good sign that we're in sync as a community.
But when you say, when some people say abolition of freedom, they have to finish the sentence and define what they mean freedom means. Does freedom means I can do anything I want? Right? So there's freedom means that we in a community define certain things we need to do in order to survive together. So that's why every time they say that, it's an incomplete sentence.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and the whole concept of freedom needs to be reevaluated as a society. If we want to grow together, and you mentioned that there is not a common narrative as our leaders have put out. The common narrative has been we want freedom. And as you said, it's an incomplete sentence, but freedom for what? For more prosperity, for more abundance for everyone. What's the goal, the ultimate goal as a society? And I believe, I would love to hear your thoughts on, what should be the ultimate goal? What should be as a society, what should we strive for?
So we need to get off this consumerism idea, the idea that the more consumer goods we have, the better life we lead. And so there's a good society would combine three things. People spend more time with each other and rather than working, spend more time reflecting, contemplating, meditating, reading, and spend more time in spiritual pursuits. All these things have an interesting attribute together, two actually. One is obvious, one is not. One is they're much more friendly to the environment. Right? They're not product intensive. They produce contentment or happiness, if you wish, just as much as chasing the next consumer good. But they're much more environmentally friendly. But second, and that is less obvious, they are also much more amenable to social justice. Here it's like this: if I want ever more goods, and now you tell me I have to reallocate to other people, I'll fight you. But if I want to meditate, or I want to enjoy the sunsets, or I want to enjoy time with my children, I'm not short if you have the same. So a society in which people are less hooked on consumer goods. Now, I don't think they should live a life of poverty. That's where the kibbutz and many of the other, the hippies and all these movements fell apart because they asked people to kind of live a life of ashes and cloth, kind of like the most extreme nuns and such. And no, I think we can, giving robots and artificial intelligence, the economy can provide us with a reasonable level of standard of living. But as long as we are not on the Sisyphean pursuit of the next gadget and willing to put some ceiling on our consumerism, we'll live a life which is more contented, it's more environmentally friendly, and socially more open to social justice.
Yeah, I love that answer. Thank you, Professor. I would like to switch gears into more of a personal note as we begin to wrap up this conversation. If you could have a conversation with one person, living or dead, who would you like it to be?
Or if I could have a conversation with one person?
Yes.
And maybe Gandhi.
Why?
Well, first of all, his pacifism. And second, his objection to consumerism. Now, I took it at the extreme, but he had the right idea.
I love that answer. And what piece of advice do you remember up until today that made the most impact in you?
Well, his commitment to family, his own family.
Wow. What are the deepest questions that are still unresolved in your career in the field of sociology that ignite your heart?
So my concern is now, since I'm completely convinced that the only way we're going to get a major social transformation is through a major social movement. Where can we social movements are usually sparked.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, the feminist movement was sparked by Betty Friedan's book on feminism. The environmental movement, Rachel Carlson's book on silence and the DDT, Silent Spring. Ralph Nader started a consumer movement. And so I'm looking, where's the spark for the transforming social movement we need?
Yes, and let me just say that, standing in the shoulders of giants like yourself, Professor, my generation, and our listeners really have the opportunity to spark that movement, to begin that movement, because we are moving to a place where, your teachings and your wisdom can really show us the way. So with that, I just want to say thank you for your work, thank you for your time today, and I'm really honored to have you as a guest on the show.
Thank you for very, very tutored, well thought out questions. And let me invite you and everybody else to join us on civildialogues.org. It's a new platform that we created in which we can continue these conversations.
Absolutely.
The message is you. Be well, be safe.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor.